Back to the whiteboard. So we've talked about data ingestion, talked about activation. Let's now talk about insights and machine learning. So we told you about the fact that Experience Platform now offers an embedded version of Juypter Lab in Platform. So basically, we call this Data Science Workspace, DSW, which is a component inside Platform, which has native access to data sets. And as Andy will be showing in the demonstration, this embedded version of Juypter Lab has the ability to read from Platform and to write to Platform. So this integration is native and relies on SDKs that have been built by Adobe. And basically, many data scientists today, they spend about 80% of their time on understanding data, modeling data, before they can actually do something meaningful with that data. And that's a problem that Experience Platform wanted to solve. So with Platform, we now give data scientists the ability to natively read that data from Platform. And given that it's already modeled against an XDM standard, it's relatively easy for these data scientists to continue to work with the feature pipeline and building a model in the next step. And as such, they can spend 80% of their time on building models, training models, and improving them instead of wasting that time on data ingestion. So that's the Data Science Workspace. So Juypter Lab supports languages like Python, R, PySpark, Scala, and TensorFlow natively inside Platform. And as such, you can build those models inside Platform UI. So that's machine learning. On the insights side, it's also important to know that we have something that's called query service. Query service is actually a layer on top of Platform. So this query service offers native SQL access through a Postgres protocol to Platform, which means that you can connect to Platform now from, for instance, a terminal window, from Power BI, and Tableau, natively towards this query service layer. So every solution that supports Postgres can do that now. And as such, you can use simple standard SQL language to interact with experience data inside Platform. Of course, SQL wasn't really built for experiences. SQL is quite an old language, to say it like that, while experiences require some specific functionalities. So Adobe has released a couple of things called Adobe Defined Functions, ADF, which will help you with things like sessionization, attribution, session timeouts, and so on. So these Adobe Defined Functions make it easier for you to interact with that data inside Platform. One more way of interacting with that data is through Customer Journey Analytics. Customer Journey Analytics will be demonstrated by Andy in a couple of minutes. Also connects to the query service layer in the background and reads that data from Platform, and basically gives you the ability to report on omnichannel data, so not just web data or mobile application data, really omnichannel data, and as such you'll be able to build flows that start on the website but maybe end in a store, and visualize that online to offline kind of workflow through CJA. And the third way of interacting with query service is also for machine learning purposes. When I speak to data scientists, they typically have their own computer that they really like, and they would like to continue to use their own machine and their own local setup to interact with data sources, to do modeling and so on. So many data scientists have a solution called Anaconda installed on their local machine, but it can be anything that supports things like Juypter Lab. And from their local machines, they can then connect to the query service layer of Platform, load that data in a data frame onto their local machine, and from there work with it, build the model, train it on the local machine, and only when they finished at that moment, they can then publish that model towards Data Science Workspace inside Platform for scoring of customers and so on. So those give you a good overview of the ways to interact with insights and machine learning from an Experience Platform perspective. So I'd like to give the word to Andrew Hawkins now to do a demonstration of those topics.
Thanks. Thanks, Wouter. What we'll do, we'll just start by going into the user interface of the Experience Platform. And as you can see here, this is the query overview that we're in now. We'll be able to just browse our queries, see the log and the credentials that we need to connect into the query service. Before we do that, I'd just like to start by just going back to the Datasets tab, which we may have already explored today. So one of the things we'll be looking at very briefly today, the main data set we'll actually be looking at very briefly today, is the website interactions data set, right? This is the streaming data, event-based data that's been coming in. And I just want to draw your attention before I dive into the SQL service to the actual table name it's been given here, because this will be referenced very shortly. This data set, as you can see here, this user interface view offers you the activity overview, or digest if you like, as to what's been going on, and I think you've been taken through this. This is all very useful information to see the records that have been ingested and the batches that are coming in against this data set. There's this table name here that we're going to use as part of the SQL service. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that. And obviously, as we'll be working with this, we're not going to be going into extensive detail at all. But bear in mind, obviously, this SQL service obviously is going to be having access to this underlying data set and the table. It obviously, therefore, is going to be operating at the schema level that again Wouter has spent this morning, and the team has spent this morning talking to you about, right? So this table of data that we'll just be seeing very briefly is it contains this data schema. So it's important to understand when you're working with this, the query service, you really are working with XDM or the schema that you've designed for your particular data set. That's why it's so important, and that's why I think we've spent quite a long time trying to stress the foundational nature of XDM and how important it is, just how important it is to the Experience Platform. Okay, so let's dive in and have a look what we've got. So the first thing is you're able to just browse the queries that have been there. The log as well. So this is quite useful. You can see there so just refresh the log there. You can see in near real time the log of queries that are run against platform and the data sets on platform. Now, what's very useful to note, as you can see here, is that what client generated this, when there was Gen PostgreSQL, pSQL, or many other things besides. There's a few more, I think, in the list, or even the API against there as well, or even the user interface itself as well, which we've embedded into there, so you can create queries in the user interface itself. The thing which most of you will be doing, or things which most of you will be interested in, is this section, to be honest. So obviously, if you're here, it's assumed by this point you have a fair understanding of SQL, and this today's little demonstration is certainly no SQL lesson. But the things you'll probably want are these. So you'll either do one of two things. You'll probably either run this from a command line perspective, which you can do there. So if you copy that to the clipboard there, that's the thing you'll need to get started on the command line. I'll just show you this really briefly because it is, again, I didn't want to spend this time simply running SQL queries in front of your eyes. There's no need to do that. But just to give you some context as to what we've been looking at, a couple of things here. Just wanted to select the particular item from the schema there from this particular data set. As I pointed out, that's the table name there. Whereabouts, I wanted to select that, and a limit, obviously, to the result returned, and that returned the data on that line there. I then went on and selected a further item, or further items, should I say, items of data, columns of data from that same table, whereabouts. So I wanted to take it from, and obviously I put a limit on that there. So again, extraordinarily simple, SQL being run there But just to prove that's connected, and that's all you have to do to simply, just put those credentials in the command line, and you can start literally writing SQL queries. And all you really need to know is an understanding of the schema behind the data set, or the table in this case. Again, hence stressing the importance of understanding the schema that goes behind every data set. But once you've got that in place, then you can really write SQL as you know it. So there's no reason to not get started very, very quickly with this indeed. One thing I wanted to point out is that we do have Adobe defined functions as well, embedded in the or able to be run against the query service. So a couple of things: sessionization. Those of you who know analytics fairly well will also be familiar with the concept of a session, and that explains how you can sessionize your values of data if you're working with analytics data to create different sessions. So you don't have to stick to the default 30 minutes. So you can do more in depth in the analysis than what comes out of the box. There's also some attribution, some basic attribution as well, queries or attribution queries that you're able to run and modify for yourselves, right? Okay, so this is again going down right into last touch attribution with expiry condition and expiry timeout even. So good to be able to have that underlying access to the data, and remembering obviously that the Adobe Analytics dataset, or the analytics dataset which you'll be ingesting, is just one dataset of many that you'll be running against the against the datasets on platform. Not only obviously one data set of many, but also the data sets at of course the unified profile level. So there you calling back data sets, you're obviously able to recognize that there will be queries that you can make against the profile itself. Also, obviously, you're able to actually create data sets as well. So you're not simply limited to querying the underlying data sets. Again, if you can create tables of data, then if you can create tables of data, you can create data sets back on platform. It's a reasonably simple task for anyone who's familiar with SQL. So if there is data, or if there's data in sets that you would like to split out or break up into specific new unique data sets on platform, the SQL service is a very good way to get that done, rather than have to ingest that data all over again, for example. So yeah, offering a lot of flexibility there. Of course, another extremely useful function of SQL is that it allows you to connect using Postgres credentials, and services like Power BI, Tableau, and many other visualization tools and analysis tools use these credentials to connect into data lakes and databases. So you can think of Experience Platform in exactly the same way. So by taking these Postgres credentials, I can go into a solution like Tableau, open up, put all the data I need into there, and just authenticate using a simple username and password system. So if I just copy that password onto there, I'll just show you very, very quickly. Just going to execute a query or connect into the Adobe Experience Platform right now, and you can see here what we've got is the tables of data, or the data sets, available to us now in Tableau. So I'm able to drag that across onto the table box there, and it's going to load the metadata and associated schema into there, and I'll be able to run any sort of visualization that I find I'd like to get done there. So having access to the, like I said, all the underlying data sets that you have in your instance of Experience Platform, but connecting via your tool of choice, your visualization tool of choice, is an extremely useful thing. So you may never have to be reliant on running this from the user interface at all. You can simply have people in your organization who know that tool very, very well, connecting into to the Experience platform. So let's move on to the another area which I wanted to talk about, which was the Science Workspace, the area of Science Workspace. And as Val said, the core driver, of course, the core framework behind all this is the Juypter Notebooks or Juypter Labs environment that we have here. And this is embedded, as you can see, inside the user interface itself. So again, you're in the same user interface that we've been using all the way through platform. You simply open up a new notebook inside the same user interface, and you have access to all the underlying data, again, that's in the data sets on the platform. So again, all that's really required here, above and beyond obviously the knowledge of one of these frameworks or languages, which you're going to have to write queries in or execute in, is a kind of foundational knowledge of the schema that you're using with the data set. And once you have that, you can obviously use your data science skills or use the data science skills of the agency you're working with to get the most out of the data inside Adobe Experience Platform. You can see here we've embedded some starter kits, as well as obviously blank canvases to help you get started in these languages and frameworks that we support today, and some templates as well to help you get started with this. So you don't have to literally start with a blank canvas every time. Some of these can be quite useful in terms of data exploration and seeing what can be done. Okay, so as just a little insight into what can be done, I was just going to take you through this very quickly. So again, some of you who are obviously familiar with data science will be familiar with these kind of concepts. I'll try and make this as relevant as possible to everyone, and this is, don't worry, we won't be going heavy into data science. I just wanted to show some of the things which are available on Experience Platform. Part of, obviously, a huge part of Juypter Labs is still simply data exploration. So you don't need to be running any particular data science as such. You can just be analyzing and exploring data for very useful insights as part of Juypter Labs. And this you can see here is exactly what we're doing. So we're simply reading data from the Experience Platform and querying the underlying dataset ID. So much as we reference the table name for our SQL query, we're just referencing a unique dataset ID for this query. It's that simple, and you don't need to think of it any other way. And here we're just going on and doing some basic analysis checks, etc., and offering some summary statistics of our data. So again, those of you familiar with this kind of data exploration will be very familiar with this. Obviously, as well, you can import your own packages and libraries that you may need to work with to do things like visualization and box plot analysis and all kinds of things like that. So yeah, like I said, if you're familiar with this kind of data analysis work in Juypter Labs, this will be very straightforward to you indeed. But like I said, the key takeaway here is that all you really need to know is the schema that's associated with the data set that you're exploring, and the rest of it should come from your own existing knowledge of data science. So there's a lot you can get done, and a lot of very useful exploration and analysis you can get done simply by having this inside the Adobe Experience Platform. The other thing, of course, you can get done is actually start to think about doing things like modeling and what we call core data science work. So in this instance, we're just going to have a look at a very basic churn model feature that could be run on the same data set. Again, we're just going to import some libraries for some feature engineering at the top there, read the data set in, start to do some pre-prepare work, analysis work, or work to split things like time period and all kinds of things like that. and do some more data splitting in order before we have to work with the data to get it into the shape we need to actually run a model. Then obviously you have to define what churn means in this case. So, you know, the very concept of churn is obviously different depending on what data set you're using and what your business is. Viewing the distribution of those who did and did not churn in that case, doing a simple summary analysis, and then splitting all kinds of things, looking at all kinds of things like how people ordered, whether they churned or not, and what kind of quantities were involved. So in this case, we're just kind of looking at model the features of the data in this instance before we actually run the recipe. Again, this can go on and can be fairly extensive as you wish. The correlation analysis, and then again, those of you who have run any churn analysis will be very familiar with the concept of things like dummy variables for churn analysis in here. And then finally, the data preparation is done. As Wouter said, data preparation is obviously still going to be a huge part of data science. The actual model building begins when we split the data into train and test, and then again you have complete control over how you're doing this here in terms of test size. And those of you who will be, who have done this in the past will be very, very familiar with all these basic concepts. Logistic regression model is being used in this case to do churn analysis, and then finally we actually get on to looking at the relative importance of things like feature scoring. Okay, and then the output of the data can be written back to platform, right? So this in this case will be what we're going to use in order to actually score or create a churn score or a churn analysis in this case. So again, I mentioned in the queries analysis section that another way to create a data set on platform is obviously using a simple create table command in SQL. Another way to create new data sets on platform is coming from Data Science Workspace itself. The final part is then to actually train and score the model. And here we're using an actual recipe builder in Python, where we can actually create a recipe on platform itself. Again, this has obviously been pre-compiled, this training and scoring model package. So I won't go into too much detail, but of course you could do exactly the same yourself, and the output of which is then saved, of course, as sets, as data sets, or as recipes in this case on Experience Platform. The idea being that once this is done and the recipe is then created, the recipe then exists on Experience Platform. So then what we call our kind of marketing tools, if you like, our kind of ability to then send out delivery messages like an email or orchestrate a journey, for example, with a message, could be predicated on the score that we've just calculated, the churn score that we've just calculated coming here. We don't then need to import or export this kind of data anywhere else, because it's sitting in Experience Platform. And I'm just going to jump over to show you the recipes which sit under models here. Because this is sitting in Experience Platform, this data doesn't need to be imported or exported anywhere else. It's held now at the what we call the profile level. Again, the concept of the unified profile and the customer profile was covered extensively this morning. It's held at the profile level. So any individual or any profile that was contained in this data set now potentially has a churn score against them. So like I said, we could predicate the sending of a message or the experience on a website even against the fact that someone has a particular churn score, which is just incredibly useful to do. Okay, so again, the extensive nature of data science is obviously not something that we can cover in such a very short space of time. But if you have further questions around exactly how, data science and the important specific features of data science workspace that you probably may have if you're if you work in this world on a daily basis, please post them in the chat, or we can take them up afterwards. This really is just meant to be a very short introduction. Finally, just to round off this section on insight and analysis, we're going to have a look at something called customer journey analytics. Now, query service and data science workspace are obviously two fairly specialist areas. Both SQL and data science really fall into the categories of, well, you've either got the skills or you haven't. And if you've got the skills, there's a great deal of value in them, of course, and a lot of people have. But we didn't just want platform to be about analyzing data using one or the other of those things. We wanted to democratize and make the data more readily accessible, which is why we came up with the concept of customer journey analytics. And really here, what if you would like to think about this, if any of you know Adobe Analytics, and specifically Adobe Analytics Workspace, it's been very successful and it's had very good feedback in terms of our customers who can now do much better and faster analysis on their Adobe Analytics data using the very easy drag and drop nature of the user interface called Analysis Workspace. So we took the concept of Analysis Workspace and basically just placed it on top of all the data in Adobe Experience Platform. So this is extremely powerful because we're kind of moving now from beyond just a kind of web or mobile analytics world to a world where you can analyze using Workspace all the data, potentially all the data on Experience Platform. And this is the kind of thing you can end up with. So this is very, very simple but recognizable to those who know Workspace. Couple of freeform, couple of tables that I've got here. One just a simple table at the bottom, and one a flowchart at the top. So I'm just going to talk you through very, very quickly what is going on here, and then I'll take you through how we actually go about constructing this. This is this is comprised of two data sets, and this is called a cancel service workflow. So you can see here we've got some events going on, 4 specific events, and they've all been ingested onto Adobe Experience Platform in a timestamp manner. Hence, we're able to create a flow chart out of them. Now, these were web events. This references page name here. So this is like a website event-based data set showing where somebody was from, and the fact that they got onto the cancel service page on the website, which is obviously a big red flag to those of you who have to deal with those kind of things or offer those kind of services. But what happens after this is that we switch to analyzing something called a support contact number or unique ID. And this is coming from a completely different data set. This is coming from a call center data set, but because it's got a timestamp in it, we're actually looking at the kind of aggregate of 2 different data sets now, but we can see how the flow occurred, right? So we're actually looking at a flow chart of 2 different data sets, and seeing how somebody was on the website, the same person, same identifier, has identified someone who was on the website, looking at the cancel service page, went into the call center, actually called the call center, obviously got a support contact number automatically generated, a unique support contact number automatically generated. That call was resolved or not, and ended up with something called call feeling, which is a variable that we collected and you may collect yourself. So it's just a very simple example of how, and I'll show you how we do it, how we are now analyzing 2 different data sets, one web and one website data set, and one data set which was about coming directly from the call center, but we're able to now put them in the same flow visualization. Okay, and yeah, again, just to show you that we're able to do things like this now, obviously because we've got 2 different data sets in this visualization, we're able to do things like freeform tables as well, which is just a very standard feature of Analysis Workspace. So this is a much more visual, as you can see, way to analyze your data, where you can simply drag and drop the dimensions, metrics, and filters from the left-hand side onto the canvas on the right. So this is not about SQL, having to write SQL queries. This is not about having to have data science skills. This is an extremely accessible way to get analysis done on the Adobe Experience Platform. Okay, so just to take you through very quickly, and again, this is not a deep dive, so again, those of you who want more information, please ask and we can absolutely provide this. Just take you through very quickly what's happening here. The first thing we have to do is just create a simple connection. Now, connections, you can have as many as you like, but connections here are the fundamental data sets that you want to work with. So when we're analyzing all that data, we probably don't want everything on Experience Platform because that's a lot of data. So we're basically saying, oh, I want these specific data sets to come in during this connection. Okay, so that'll be the connection that you're using to get that visualization done. Those of you familiar with Adobe Analytics, think of this like report suites, but where you can merge several different report suites at once. The critical thing here, as well as what we're doing, is we are choosing the person ID. Now, the person ID in this case is simply taking the identity namespace that is common to those three data sets. Okay. And then by selecting that, we have then effectively created a unified profile view of those data sets when we analyze them. So actually, this is extremely flexible, above and beyond our real-time customer profile, which sits on platform. This analysis is done at the person ID of your choosing every time you create a connection to the underlying data sets. So this is very powerful. So having selected those data sets that you want to work with for this particular connection, you then create a view of them. So what we mean by a view is, first, you're able to adjust things like the session settings. And again, contrast how easy this is and accessible this is compared with something like a SQL query. All right. So, and obviously they're meant for different purposes, but this is just showing how you can actually change the session settings when you're looking at that visualization. You would then add the components as well. So here's an acknowledgement that within the data set, you've got different, obviously different components of data based on the schema, but you may want to display them in a friendly name, right? So that's something you couldn't adjust straight away. You can also adjust, crucially, this could be something you can really spend quite a long time on and get a lot of value out of, the attribution settings on particular dimensions of data. So this is the how to adjust the attribution settings based on obviously how you want to analyze that data and how you want that data to look when it's visualized. Again, this is not destructive in any way. This specifically is just for the the specific data connection that we'll be using, and this is the view on top of it. So this isn't changing the underlying data sets in any way at all. And once you've done all that, you would then save that data view and go back and end up with the kind of project at the analysis level that I showed you at the very start, where I came in on. So those data sets, and you can select it from up here. So this is where you select your data view. So you take that data view into a visualization tool called Analysis Workspace, and then you can go and do a range of different things with it. And again, the visualizations are all the same that those of you who know Analysis Workspace will be very used to already. So it's really a build from the kind of quite technical nature of query service, quite technical nature of data science, but extremely valuable, both of those could be, to get your analysis and insight work done, to the much more accessible world of customer journey analytics, where we're working with kind of drag and drop canvas to create visualizations. So that is a very quick introduction, very brief introduction to the world of insight and analysis, which is available on Experience Platform. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions, but I hope that's just giving some of you an overview of what AEP can offer in this respect. And I hope you've enjoyed the session.
Thank you very much, Andy. Let's wrap it up with this architecture overview. So we've been doing the whiteboards as part of the session, but after the session, I'll be sending this out to you. This is a clean diagram of all the components that were discussed today for future reference. I guess it would be useful to all of you.